So back in July, the National Treasury gazetted amendments to the carbon offset regulations, which set out the eligibility criteria for carbon offset projects. These amendments come after years of uncertainty and delays, during which the Carbon Tax Act was introduced, and that was in 2019. While the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted industrial output and little experience was gained in achieving emission reductions, government and the private sector are now engaged in developing some kind of framework. For more on this, let's bring in Eckart Zollner. He's the head of business development at Economic Development Solutions at that institution. It's great to have you on the program, Eckart. Thanks very much indeed for making time. Let's begin with some background. I imagine this is a story that could easily be lost to many of our viewers. Can you share perhaps the overview of what these amendments actually entail?
Yeah, good morning, Ayanda, to you and your viewers. Nice to be here. Thank you very much. So these amendments are exciting developments. As you probably know, South Africa is the first country on the African continent to have legislated carbon tax regime, a carbon tax management regime in order to reach emission reduction targets. And these amendments are really in line with calls by the industry over the last year and a half to assist in the nationalization of the national adaptations of the program. So the two most exciting developments are really that it goes towards the creation of a carbon positive offset industry, which is part of the whole carbon tax framework. And essentially that it allows a national offset registry to be defined and to be created. Traditionally, the offset registry were all run by European definitions and out of Europe. And these registries are really responsible to administer carbon offset programs and carbon offset projects. And the second development in line with that is that the standards need to be developed on a national basis rather than be adopted from Europe. As in terms of what types of projects will the registry allow, will become certifiable offset projects.
Eckart, I wonder if I can just come in there. Perhaps let's take another step back. The Carbon Tax Act, which was introduced a couple of years ago, help us understand the reasons behind its introduction, in other words, the objective here, and from that starting point, why it needed to have amendments.
Yeah, so the Carbon Tax Act follows really the signing of the Paris Agreement, and that goes back to 2016, where the world came together and fleshed out a program to reduce carbon emissions and reach a target to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees or below by 2050. Right. So each country had to go away and develop its own, what is called national determined contributions. And that's really a target in terms of reducing national emission factors, which South Africa has done. And we're currently in phase 1 of our National Carbon Tax Act implementation. So there are certain thresholds set at the moment. It only addresses scope 1 emitters, which are really companies that are responsible. It has to do with the burning of fossil fuels that obviously creates harmful emissions. And there's certain thresholds that are set at minimum input requirements of 10 megawatt of thermal energy for that. So the Carbon Tax Act really goes around reporting on fuel combustion, measuring that and managing that in phase 1. In phase 2, which starts in 2023, other elements of emissions will be included, like fugitive emissions and later on also industrial processes. And the reporting framework makes allowances for a number of offsets, a number of allowances, and offset allowances are one of the allowances. There's a basic tax-free allowance. There's also a trade exposure allowance that applies to different sectors of industries differently. their performance allowances, budget allowances as well. So essentially, the Carbon Tax Act aims to measure and reduce emissions, but at the same time, it's not just an instrument of yielding a stick, it's also an instrument of dangling a carrot, of putting incentives in place for companies to invest in carbon positive activities.
Yeah, these amendments, though, they don't guarantee compliance, which is obviously where the rubber hits the road.
They don't, although non-compliance can be expensive. I mean, some of the large emitters, they can easily be liable for hundreds of millions, if not a billion plus rand in terms of additional liabilities. And we've seen that the compliance is relatively high, which is encouraging.
Thanks very much indeed for that take. A lot to think about. Really do appreciate your time on the program today. Eckart Zollner, who is joining us to help us better understand some of the amendments in some respects to the Carbon Tax Act. He's the Head of Business Development at Economic Development Solution. Once again, thanks very much indeed.